it's a real joy not only to have you here, but to already feel the energy and the enthusiasm. This is a very exciting topic. It's a hot topic, and we're glad that you're here to listen and to participate, and hopefully to have new visions opened up in your mind about what we can do and how we can do it. A special welcome to the Youth Policy Council of South High. Raise your hands. To Maureen Benenda, their stalwart principal, to Joe Caforio, and I encourage all of the Worcester State students to connect with South High. If we're lucky, they'll be in your seats in a couple of years. I also want to mention a warm welcome to the Worcester Food Policy Council members, to Jean McMurray of Worcester County Food Bank, to members of the community, to faculty and students here, and also a very warm welcome to Carol and the members of Cy's family. My name is Maureen Power, and I'm a professor of urban studies and the director of an intergenerational urban institute here at Worcester State. And Cy Topol was one of those stalwart elders who came back to school, came to forums like this, and loved them. He was a staunch supporter of the kind of change that our speaker addresses here today, and he was a valiant warrior in the fight against hunger. Cy loved these forums, often had his controversial, shall I say, questions that he would ask, and he would pull me aside at the end and say, you know, Maureen, the way it really is, and he'd give me the lowdown. Well, Cy's spirit is here. And I would encourage you to nurture those questions that come up in you. There will be time at the end for you to address them, because that's what Cy would do. He was an activist, he was involved in policy, and he was always questioning and always thinking. So we are delighted to have a forum of this caliber, with presenters of this caliber, to go forward with Cy's vision and tradition. So Carol, would you like to say a word?
I bet. On behalf of my entire family, thank you, Maureen, and thanks to everyone for coming today and supporting this lecture in memory of my dad. He would have loved this day. He was passionate about hunger issues and did whatever he could to help on the ground, mostly through Rachel's Table, and tried to make other people aware also of the help that was needed. Dad was also passionate about Worcester State College, now Worcester State University. He would have loved that. And once it was Worcester State Teachers College. We lived right around the corner, and to him, it was almost like living on a college campus. As he plowed through his senior years, he spent even more time here and was so graciously welcomed by Maureen and others. For him, the Intergenerational Urban Institute was the jackpot. A chance to exercise his mind, share his wealth of knowledge, and mix with the kids, as he would say. That was really a trifecta for him. And it kept him sharp, and it kept him young. Ironically, Dad also had an affinity with South High School. I understand many of you are here today from South. And he was periodically invited there to share his World War II and his USS Missouri experiences. And he loved so much telling us about them when he came home. So thank you to all of you for the great work that you do. Never give up the cause. Dad was still fighting for hungry and the disadvantaged even at age 96. So God willing, that's a lot more years for all of us in that room. Be well.
Thank you, Carol. And I would like to say say a little bit about our format here. We will first have our keynote speaker, Jen Pompendek, to give the main address, followed by 3 respondents. And they are Justine Kahn. Justine Kahn is the Director of Child Nutrition Outreach. She was the director, but now she's the Director of Special Projects, which is even higher on the line, right? With Project Bread, that wonderful organization that through the Walk for Hunger, which will happen May 1st, helps to feed many people in Massachusetts through their aid and support of food pantries, and most of all, does enormous work on the policy end of things. We have our own Donna Lombardi, who is the Director of School Nutrition here in Worcester, and you may not know this, folks, but her reputation is across the country for the innovative and wonderful things that we're doing here. Donna is on her vacation, but said, I have to come to this. It sounds so exciting. We also have our good friend Maureen Benenda, the ringleader from South High, the person who has the strongest can-do attitude of anyone I've ever met, and who is great at cultivating leadership and turning things around. She is very attuned to the issue of hunger. After they panelists, and they can do that, you can do that just right from the table there, they're going to each have about 5 minutes to respond to Jan. And then you have the rest of the time to ask all kinds of questions, and I think you will probably have many. I am very, very pleased to welcome Jan Pompendek to this campus. Jan and I went to school together when we were both young and beautiful, right, Jan? At the Heller School at Brandeis. And her book, her groundbreaking book, Sweet Charity, about emergency food and the end of an entitlement, is a classic. And I remember one day someone from the social department ran down and said, have you got Jan's book? I need it for my class. So now, this new book. Jan is currently a faculty member at Hunter City University of New York, a professor of sociology. But she has invested enormous time and energy in focusing on this issue of school meals. It's an issue that crosses all social class lines, and it goes to the heart of some of the issues we deal with now with childhood obesity. She knows all too well the contradictions and the difficulties in the way we have constructed this feeding system. She's clear that meals are a way we have to teach students about healthy foods, but she's not ignorant of how corporate funding for vending machines gives discretionary funding to schools. But she's very clear that schools are not a marketplace. And she has a vision of how things could be. And she is here today to share that with you. So Jan, thank you for coming all this way.
It's a real pleasure to be here and to see the room full of mostly young people and some elders to mix in. I love the idea of an intergenerational institute, and it is really an honor to give a talk in memory of Cy Topol. And I'm hoping that the day will come when you'll have to change the theme of the Cy Topol Memorial Lectures, because we will have eliminated hunger. It's outrageous that people are suffering from hunger in a country that is swimming in excesses of one sort and another. And I want to talk to you about the potential of school food to contribute to reaching that time when, as I say, you'll have to change the theme for the Cy Topol lectures. I'm going to read a tiny little excerpt from the introduction just to kind of put this in context. A decade ago, had I told friends that I was writing a book on school food, I can only imagine that I would have encountered stifled yawns or polite nods, quickly followed by attempts to change the subject. My colleagues in the anti-hunger community would have understood. They know that school food represents a central component of the nation's food assistance safety net and an essential bulwark against childhood hunger. And of course, school food service professionals and public health nutritionists would have grasped the import. For most people, however, school food was just there, taken for granted, a magnet for jokes and standard grumbling. It appeared to merit the proverbial analogy to the weather. Everybody complained about it, but no one did anything about it. Today, however, people in many communities are trying to do something about it. As an article in Family Circle in 2006 put it, in living rooms and lunchrooms, in meeting halls and school kitchens, there's a quiet revolution going on. Parents are banding together to make sure that kids eat healthy at school. Marion Nestle, the author of, among other books, Food Politics and What to Eat, has labeled this a major national movement. It has enormous potential, this major national movement. In the first place, school food in the United States constitutes 7 billion meals a year. So if you're concerned about the impact on the environment of the way that we grow and process food, why then here's an obvious lever for change. If we can shift school food in the direction of procuring from farms that grow things in ways that sustain the soil, that are sustainable, why then we can begin to create the markets for sustainably grown food at a level that will help to shift our whole system. I could go on, and maybe during questions and answers I will. But I just want to say that this has enormous power to affect all of us. Obviously, the first priority is making sure that hungry kids have access to healthy, tasty meals. But it isn't just about hungry kids. It's about all kids. I'm going to start by reading you the lyrics to a song. I'm on the board of directors of an organization called Why Hunger, formerly known as Why Hunger Year. And on that board is Tom Chapin, who's the brother of the singer-songwriter Harry Chapin, who almost everybody has heard of Harry Chapin. And Tom read the book when it first came out, and then he wrote a song. And this song is called The Ultimate Lunchroom. And I'm going to read it to you. And while I'm reading it to you, you could listen for the following things. Okay, in the Ultimate Lunchroom, what will the students be eating? Who will prepare it? What will happen to the waste? Who will actually be eating it? Who will pay for it? And what will the students learn? Okay, so I won't try to sing this for you. I'll just read it to you. I come in every morning at 7. I leave every day about 4. My job is to set up the lunch line and clean it up after the war. To the students at William McKinley, I'm not just a lady who stands at the steam table there with a net in my hair and plastic gloves over my hands. I am part of the ultimate lunchroom. The food here will open your eyes. Every dish is delish and extremely nutritious. Every meal is a total surprise. If you've never had Bing cherry tacos, well, lucky you, here's your big chance. Plus a dandelion pie and a special stir-fry made of backyard collectible plants. And a hot whole grain bread from our oven makes a sandwich you'll never forget, like the mackerel melt over sourdough spelt or the shrimp on a buckwheat baguette. It's all part of the ultimate lunchroom where we nurture the culture of try, where we serve only food that was born to be chewed and that tastes like the 4th of July. Every morning we head for the garden and pick what looks good to our eyes. If it's fennel or turnip, our cook's going to churn up a turnip and fennel surprise. And as teachers and kids eat together, exploring what's there on the plate, where it's from, how it grew, why it nourishes you, lunch becomes more than just what you ate. Chowing down in the ultimate lunchroom, new connections are easy to see because the gravings and dressings are edible lessons digested with each recipe. It's just how every class ought to be. If you've ever been stuck in a lunch line, you know just how slow it can be. That won't happen here because there is no cashier and you don't have to pay because it's free. And the food is all served on real dishes, so less plastic and no styrofoam. And we compost at school, which turns out to be cool because now the kids compost at home. And when they're leaving the ultimate lunchroom, the kids and the teachers all say, as they gather their books and they wave to the cooks, "Thanks a lot. It was far and away the most interesting class of the day." So good for Tom, and if you go online to tomchapin.com, you can download the lyrics. It's part of a whole CD of songs called Good Food and the Good Earth. So let's go over those questions that I posed for you, and let's start with what will students be eating? What are students eating in the lunchrooms of America? Is it going to be that turnip and fennel surprise, or is it going to be Smucker's Uncrustables for schools with some 57 ingredients, many of them unpronounceable? A story from my research: when you do this kind of research, you travel around and immerse yourself as best you can in aspects of the system, and one of the things I did was to go to the Child Nutrition Industry Conference, which is a conference that is jointly sponsored each year by the School Nutrition Association, which is the kind of professional group for food service staff, and a number of the manufacturers who produce products that supply our school food. And I was a newcomer to this event, had never been before, and so I didn't know that you should rush in and sign up for the high-profile, most desirable of the What's New for You sessions. So I ended up in a What's New for You session that was sponsored by Blue Bunny Ice Cream Novelties, and the particular ice cream novelty that they were pushing to food service directors in this particular session was something called the Captain Nemo Bomb Pop. Captain Nemo is a cartoon character, and the Bomb Pop had the wonderful advantage that it would turn your tongue blue. Now, the theme of this particular Child Nutrition Industry Conference was, in fact, childhood obesity. And I left that conference, which was in Austin, Texas, to go to Hawaii, where I had an opportunity to look into some schools that were trying to reintroduce to Hawaiian children, particularly Native Hawaiian children, some of the traditional foods of the Native Hawaiian culture, in this case taro. And so the children were, in fact, restoring ancient Hawaiian taro beds. These were children in a Hawaiian language immersion school, and so they were learning how taro grows and how it nourishes you, and how the propagation of taro cared for the environment, and how the taro was integrated into a complex ecological system that provided food and maintained the health of the environment. So I kind of saw these two experiences, the Captain Nemo Bomb Pop approach to child nutrition and the restoring the taro beds approach to child nutrition, as maybe ends of a continuum, but really a kind of a fault line in our culture, a debate going on. On the one hand, there are voices pointing to that same $7 billion or 7 billion meals a year that I pointed to, and saying we need to use the power of our purchasing to get industry to reformulate products so that they are healthier, less fattening. That was the source of some of the 100-calorie servings of baked chips that you may now find in vending machines in your schools. It's an approach that makes a lot of sense. It's very appealing, but it somehow isn't going to get to the heart of the problem of the way that we have all been eating. And at the other hand, you have what sometimes seem like utopian approaches of restoring the taro beds and reintroducing the traditional foods, but integrated with the education. I want to just share with you some signs that the greener approach is making headway. It's not, certainly hasn't displaced the food manufacturers' hegemony in supplying school food, but it is making inroads. First of all, during the time that I worked on this book, there was a 5-fold increase in the number of farm-to-cafeteria programs in the country. When I wrote the book proposal, I went on the website of the National Farm-to-School Association, and I put the numbers in my proposal, and a couple of years later, I was only partway done with the research, but somebody asked me to give a talk, and I went back to update, and oh goodness, it had doubled. And then by the time I submitted the manuscript, I had to go back, and literally there had been a 5-fold increase. This is something that when it started seemed like a frill at the edges. Oh yeah, farm to cafeteria, we're going to buy food for our schools from nearby farms and help the farmers stay in business. It seemed like a frill. And now it increasingly seems like it has legs, as they say. It's a movement that really is spreading, and the barriers are being lowered, and more communities are able to do that. Secondly, the reliance on local procurement, which of course from an environmental point of view, I feel like I feel like asking for hands, but in the interest of time, I'll tell you the answers. But from an environmental point of view, procuring locally means less transport, okay? Less carbon emission, transporting food. It also allows you to procure from those farms that are growing things in sustainable ways. So a second sign of hope, if you will, is that the farm to cafeteria programs, when they got started, were typically one or two items added to the meal, maybe some fresh greens for the salad bar or fresh fruit. In New York, we started with New York Harvest for New York kids. We started with apples. We grow a lot of apples in New York. We were bringing our apples for our schools in from the state of Washington because they were a little bit cheaper to buy in bulk. After farm to cafeteria caught on, we started with New York apples. But now farm to cafeteria is beginning to address the center of the plate, okay? Not just the little add-ons around the edge, but the main entrees that are being served. This is big progress. Third, there's been a shift from food service directors saying, well, you know, here's our menu, show me what we could procure locally and I'll try, to tell me what we produce in this region and I will build my menu around what we grow here. I will make my menu seasonal and regional. So that's a huge shift in attitude. It isn't always easy to do, but it means there's real progress. Taking that a little further, a number of universities have become involved in what's called Foodshed Analysis, of really trying to see not only what is grown in a region, but what could be grown in the region in order to permit local procurement. Well, there's another side to this, and I loved Tom's phrase, nurture the culture of try, because you can bring these beets and turnips and fennel into your schools, but if the students aren't going to eat it, it isn't going to fly in the school food programs. And so the other side of greening the plate, if you will, is nurturing a culture among students to eat with health in mind, eat with the environment in mind, a more conscious eating. Now this doesn't just kind of happen to students, you know, there's no tooth fairy out there sprinkling some sort of dust and we all wake up and become conscious eaters. We need to learn. We need to learn about the food in our society. We need to take food for thought courses like the one Maureen is teaching. We need to integrate food into our curriculum, and more on that later. In the change what we eat component of the school food revolution is a mantra that goes, grow it, cook it, eat it. It's the idea that when, think about elementary school elementary school students. I'm sure that everyone here today has wonderful eating habits. So think about your younger cousins and sisters and brothers and elementary school children. Kids at that age are often sort of afraid of unfamiliar foods, of new foods. And one of the best ways to get them to get up the nerve to try it is for them to be involved in growing it, to go out and help harvest a crop, to have a school garden. And another great way to involve kids is to get them involved in cooking. The success of Cooking with Kids programs around the country is really phenomenal. Success in terms of equipping kids with enduring skills, learning to cook is a lifelong asset, but also in helping us build up the nerve to try new foods and expand our palates and learn to enjoy. Okay, let's move on to the question of who prepares school foods. One of the comments that got to me most, I did many interviews with school food workers, with school food service directors and with cafeteria workers, and one of the ones that got to me most was a woman who said to me, well, you don't have legs. oh, I don't? And she said, you know, you're standing behind that steam table and all the kids see is like here to here, and you're not a real person. You're serving the food, but you don't have legs. And I think we need our food service staff to be whole people. We need those adults in our schools, and we need to draw on their wisdom and their energy and their potential caring relationships with children. I particularly liked in Tom's lyrics the notion that that young people leaving the cafeteria would be waving to the cooks and saying thank you was the best class of the day. But there's a little history here that you should know about how so many of our food service staff got into a role where they're mostly opening boxes and reheating stuff that's been cooked and then frozen elsewhere. And I hear from Maureen that Worcester has really good school food, and so hopefully maybe in Worcester you're not so reliant on the defrost and reheat approach to school food.
There's mixed reviews going on. All right. We can discuss that in the question and answer period and what constitutes really good school food. But I do want to say that nationwide there is enormous reliance on what's called bulk convenience food, where the food is cooked in a factory and packed up in a brown carton and frozen and shipped to the schools, and food service workers take the food out of the cartons and put it into a convection oven and serve it. It wasn't always this way. Lots of people my age have memories of school cafeterias where food was being cooked. You know, real cooking, and the aroma would waft through the school, and in the morning hours you'd get a little closer to lunch and you would get hungry and you would smell good food being cooked in the cafeteria. So you might wonder, how old is she? But anyway, you might wonder what happened. And a large part of what happened was a cutback in federal support for school food that took place in the very early 1980s. It was under the guise of something called the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, and it cut a lot of programs that were important to working people in the United States, to lower income families. But one of the cuts was a cut to the subsidy for school meals. There's a subsidy that's for all the meals, for the paying meals. And what happened in the aftermath of that was that a lot of the paying customers dropped out of the school food program. But this created a kind of a fiscal squeeze for food service operations, because the subsidy was cut, the commodities were cut back, they had new reporting requirements, and at the same time their customer base shrank. About a quarter of the paying customers of school food dropped out of the program in a couple of years after that. So they had to find some way to balance the budget. And one of the ways they did this was by cutting labor costs. This was a period in our history when school systems were grappling with pensions and benefit costs, healthcare insurance costs were going up, and one way to meet budget was to switch to a lot of part-time labor, to cut back on labor hours, and a way to do that was to use these bulk convenience foods. Sociologists call this de-skilling. It was a de-skilling of the job of food service, from on-site cooking to, you know, opening the packages. This is, I think, a real wrong turn that we took. We need those jobs in our society. A job that's on the school calendar is a job that's compatible with child rearing. We have many, many, many adults in our society who are trying to rear children alone. Okay, who are filling both the breadwinner role and the nurturer role. Jobs in school food used to be a real pathway to do that, because the job is on the school calendar and on the school day. Eliminating those jobs, cutting back costs, lowering taxes, you know the mantra, because we're certainly getting a whole round of it again. Now they're trying to get rid of the teachers.
they're at it. But these are, you know, these are jobs that we need in our society. And so when we get around to a vision for the future, I want to say that it's going to include expanding the school food labor force. I should say that liability issues have also contributed to pushing our food in the direction of the defrost and reheat. There was a famous case in the state of Washington in which a child became ill, E. coli, and the parents sued the school, and the judge ruled that the school was liable because the meat had been cooked at the school. He said whoever cooks the meat is, quote, the manufacturer, and therefore the school was liable. This was a famous case. It resulted in many schools stopping cooking meat fresh on the premises and ordering meat that had been cooked elsewhere and then frozen. So we've had a lot of trends in our society that have pushed us toward this heavy reliance on defrost and reheat, and in the course of this have lost the kind of jobs that I think we need to expand once again in school food. Again, there's some signs of hope. There are some great programs out there for retraining food service workers so that they can build up the skills that they need. There have been a few funding streams for rebuilding the equipment that's been lost. You know, use it or lose it. When you don't use equipment, it eventually deteriorates and gets out of date, and they take it out of the kitchen. So when we began to look to see more real cooking in schools, we found that many of them only had warming ovens or convection ovens and didn't have full-service stoves anymore, on and on. Let's move on in the interest of time to what's going to happen with, I'm going to add one more thing to the question of who's preparing the food and say that I have a number of examples from around the country of schools where children are involved in helping to prepare the food. My favorite is the one in Davenport, California that's described in the book, where the 5th graders have a class called Food Lab. And there are 20 of them in this school, and they're in 5 teams of 4, one for every day of the week, and in their course, they prepare the menu, they scale it up to the size for the school, and they fix the food. Okay, so that's an extreme case that could only happen in a small school. But increasingly, there are cooking clubs on school campuses where children can be involved in helping to prepare the school food in one way or another. Okay, moving on to that question of what's happening to the waste. One important element of this is reducing the amount of waste. Wasting food is not something we should be teaching our children to do. And with what's happening in the global context, with oil prices going up, you know that whenever energy prices go up, food prices go up. So food is becoming even more valuable. We have people all over the world who really can't get anywhere near enough to eat. We should not be teaching our children to waste food. So one element of what's happening to waste, and a sign of hope, are schools moving to try to reduce the amount of waste that students, I don't know if you have trayless cafeteria here at Worcester. Okay. It used to be you went into a cafeteria, you took a tray, so of course you loaded it up. Okay, now in many places you're just taking the plate. This eliminates the styrofoam tray, but it also encourages you to select more carefully. But the other aspect of dealing with the waste is the one that's mentioned in Tom's lyrics, is composting. And more schools are helping students to see that all of our processes of food, that it doesn't just disappear after you've eaten, that what you leave behind is organic and could contribute to enriching the soil, could contribute to pig feed in some places. So increasingly students are involved in projects to set up composting, and some of them are in fact taking it home. I want to move on to the question of who's eating school meals in the ultimate lunchroom. Because what impressed me most was that teachers and students were eating it together. I think it's a mistake that we have moved to the situation that we certainly have in New York City, where teachers regard it as a kind of punishment to be assigned to be in the cafeteria, lunch duty, and in fact in New York it's in the union contract that you don't have to have lunch duty. I think we need adults and young people to interact around the table during the lunch day. I saw this in Sweden, where I went to take a look at the universal free school meals on the ground. I saw it in Davenport, when the 5th graders fix lunch. Their teachers want to reinforce this behavior, so almost every teacher in that school buys the lunch and eats with the children. They have checkered tablecloths, and they eat in a lovely setting where they decorate the tables with flowers from the school garden. But I also saw it at the United Talmudic Academies in Brooklyn, just a few miles from my house, where virtually all of the students are quite poor, and the classes are large, and still teachers were eating with students, and the meal had the sense of a family-style meal. So I think that the question of who is eating the school lunch or the school food really needs to be something we revisit. Very interesting. Any of you read the novel Prep, about life on a prep school campus in upper class, what I sometimes refer to as sleepaway school? In those, yeah, right, it was kind of a raunchy novel, so maybe I shouldn't be promoting it, though it was very interesting. But interestingly enough, students and teachers eat together in the fancy privileged prep schools, so maybe we need to take a leaf from that. But perhaps the more important contest over who's eating school food has to do with the issue of stigma and whether school food itself has acquired a stigma. As many of you know, we have a 3-tier eligibility system for school meals in this country. If your family income is below a certain threshold, you're eligible for free meals. And then if you're in the sort of nearly poor category, you're eligible for a reduced price meal. And then above that, you're eligible for what's called a full price meal, which is absolutely a misnomer because there's a 26 cent subsidy from the federal government in each of those meals. In many states, there's an input from the state, and then there's 15 cents worth of commodities. So at least a 40-cent subsidy. Why we would call those full-priced meals, other than to try to create a class system, I don't know. But this is a system that creates enormous problems for running a school food program, and we'll come back to those in a moment. But that has also lent a kind of stigma to school food in some locations. I'm going to read you a quote from one of my students at the University of California at Santa Cruz, where I went on my last sabbatical. And he wrote, "The cafeteria was for the poor kids. The food there was gross. Kids who did not eat in the cafeteria were embarrassed to go into it during lunch for fear that others would think they were getting free or discount lunch. And then, to make the vicious circle come home, students who do qualify for the free meal or the reduced price meal begin to stay away from it as well. I was eligible for free, but I was embarrassed and annoyed my mom for pizza money," another of my students wrote. This is a crazy system. Who in their right mind, knowing how intense the identity battles of adolescents are, how intensely young people in the junior high and high school years are trying to define themselves over against others, who would set up a lunch system based on social class? It was a mistake, and we need to get beyond it. I want to go back for a minute to the history here and say that after those early 1980s cuts, when a quarter of the paying customers dropped out of the program and school food service faced this financial squeeze, many schools began to sell items a la carte to try to get the revenue back into the cafeteria. And this escalated the class distinctions, if you will, in many school cafeterias, because if you have a separate a la carte line where people with money are going to flash their cash and buy sort of kid-friendly foods, the a la carte line, you could get French fries, you could get nachos with cheese, you could get pizza, you could get teens' favorites. It created a more visible division in many cafeterias. It also then began to infiltrate the menu in the nutritionally regulated meal, so that after a while we were seeing an awful lot of pizza and nuggets and nachos with cheese sauce. I have nothing against cheese sauce, but this is that orange neon cheese sauce. I do want to say that stigma is not the only problem associated with the three-tier eligibility system. There are enormous inefficiencies. It costs us a lot of money to send out the applications, get the applications back, certify process the applications, verify a subsample of them, communicate this, and then the cafeteria workers need to account for each meal. Each meal has to be reported as a free, reduced price, or full price. It is an enormously inefficient, time-consuming, burdensome responsibility. In some schools, there is a technological fix to this. Probably many Massachusetts schools use point-of-sale cashiers and therefore have been able to use a swipe card or a PIN number, which means that in the cafeteria it's not any longer obvious who's getting what. But these in turn have generated a whole new round of problems, because the way that swipe cards and PIN numbers typically work is that parents put money on account, and then the low balance, the account runs out of money, and the child gets to the cafeteria, to the cashier with a tray full of food, and there's no money left in the account. And unfortunately, there are stories from all over the country of food being, in essence, confiscated at the point of the cashier. You can't put the food back into the food to be served to other children, so this becomes a waste. But children being served a different meal, typically a cheese sandwich and a glass of milk, as a way of getting them to get their parents to pay to refill the school food account or to pay for the meals that they have charged. This is a problem that schools are coping with in a variety of ways, but not really what our school administrators ought to be doing. In New York City recently, the Board of Education decreed that it was up to the principals to collect the uncollected lunch fees. So is that really how you want your principal spending his or her time, is dunning parents for the missing lunch fees? So who will pay for school meals in the ultimate school lunchroom? Tom's lyrics said, there is no cashier, you don't have to pay because it's free. Well, we all know there's no such thing as a free lunch, okay? That's an element in our culture for a long time. But I do want to say that how we pay for school food is a social choice. That's our choice to make. And if we think the current system is working poorly, and that's what I'm trying to report to you, that it's inefficient, that it's in many cases inequitable, that it's error-prone, the rate of erroneous payments in the school food program is enormously high, that it diverts the attention of school administrators and school food staff. If we believe that the current system isn't working, then it's up to us to propose an alternative. And the one I want to propose is universal free school meals. And what I mean by universal free school meals is that they ought to be paid for through progressive taxation. Now, I personally believe that this should be a federal program. School meals have been a federal program in the United States since the 1930s. And the National School Lunch Act made it an official program in the mid-1940s. I don't think you can now turn to local schools or local districts and say, oh, it's your job to find the resources. I think that we should do this through federal taxation. I also think we should do it through federal taxation because on the whole, our federal taxing systems are somewhat more progressive than a lot of our state and local fundraising systems. So how would it work? Well, it would work that there would be an allocation to each school based on the number of youngsters who participated in the school meal that would cover the costs. And parents who have a lot of income would be paying a higher tax rate in progressive taxation, and they would be paying through that. But it also, of course, means that non-parents would be paying, because one of the things about an income tax is it falls on everyone with income. It's not, and I think that's appropriate. I think that the nourishment of our children at school is a responsibility of all of us, and something that affects the quality of life in our society for all of us. It profoundly affects the ability of students to absorb their education. So, my proposal would be universal free school meals paid for through federal taxation. I got to see it at work in Sweden, and I can tell you for sure that it's a simpler, more efficient, easier system. Do I think it's just around the corner? No, I have to tell you that in these times when we're experiencing a kind of a national fit about taxation, an allergy to taxation that I think is really out of sync with the needs of this society, I don't expect that it's right around the corner, but I think we need to keep speaking up about it. I think it's especially important for people who work in schools and see the complexities of the current system and the inefficiencies, to speak up about the need for a change in the way that we feed our students, our children at school. Finally, the question I posed for you when I read Tom's lyrics was, what will the students be learning? What would students learn in my visionary lunchroom? And I think that students would learn civility, because meals are really times when people interact and share. One of the things that distressed me most about the class-separated lunchrooms that I visited was the sense that we were foregoing an opportunity to build unity and democracy, democratic culture within our schools. But I also think that in a universal free program, school food could really be integrated with the curriculum. There could be lessons in nutrition, in health, in geography, in biology, in history, even in art, that focused on the school food and used it as a basis for teaching. I mean, you know, what's more interesting, really, than the question of what are we having for lunch? Why are we having it? And in our current school cafeterias, it's almost laughable to talk about integrating the curriculum, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think anyone who's had a chance to visit the edible schoolyard and see the schoolyard classroom that's there and participate in a meal there has a chance to experience the integration of learning and sharing a meal. So when I come to the end of this, I think about Cy, whom I didn't have the pleasure of knowing, but whose spirit I have sensed from what I've heard. And I think, would he have been daunted by the sort of pie in the sky, if you want to call it, character of this, or by the current atmosphere that makes us think we can't propose anything that involves taxation? I don't think so. I don't think someone who lived through the period he lived through and saw what this country can accomplish when it sets its mind to something would allow that sort of temporary setback to keep him from speaking up. So in the spirit of Cy Topol, I want to say that I believe that universal free school meals are the way to improve our school food, not only the experience of obtaining them, but also the food quality. Because if we were not selling food to children, if we were not having to compete with the food that's advertised, you know, we'd spend about $15 billion a year on advertisements aimed at young people, food advertisements aimed at young people. So anyone planning a menu to sell food to kids is really having to keep the advertising in mind. If we had a universal program, it would very quickly become the norm. That people ate kind of like meals at summer camp. If any of you have memories of meals at summer camp, it was the thing you did in the middle of the day or at breakfast in many of our schools, and it would become the basis for health, for civility, for unity within the school, and I think that's where we need to go from here.
thought would work now is if, first if we started with Donna Lombardi and gave her a few minutes to respond, and then went to Justine and finished up with Maureen. And remember to keep those questions because we will make time for them.
That was a wonderful discussion. Hello? Yes, is it on? Okay. Wonderful discussion. Okay, great. I'll lean over. I think the delivery of the school meals in the programs themselves are a reflection of the local governing authority, as the book alludes to. For every different community, you have a different delivery of the child nutrition programs. Fortunately, here in Worcester, with help from the community, our Worcester Public School wellness policy had initially started out with an emphasis of meeting the different menu components of the school meal program, utilizing what we call whole food commodities, or foods in their least processed states, with an emphasis on locally grown. That started about, with the original inception of the wellness policy, and what has evolved, and again, with enormous support from different community members, is that we are now procuring from minimally 5 farms of all different sizes, small, medium, and large. The partnership between the school feeding program, because of the volume and its effectiveness in the farms, have proved so beneficial that some of the farms have now started growing specialty items for us, and we are incorporating a lot of different types of varieties of fresh fruits and vegetables through different USDA-funded programs, not just on the school tray, but also through part of the fresh fruit and vegetable grant. And turnip and raw turnip has been one of our mainstays, so I guess we're evolutionary in that. But I'm not ignorant to the fact that there aren't flaws in the existing systems that we do even have here in Worcester, but I think, again, through support of the community and the different governing authorities, we've been able to progress forward as availability of the food items do arise. And we've been able to prove, as we've taken this slow progression, that it is also financially viable, which a lot of the different governing agencies are not in a solvent state when running the school feeding programs. And as Jan has alluded to, the whole de-skilling in the a la carte that has crept into the lunch tray, again, for a lot of different communities, can be read recently in the front page of the Globe, and now the Huffington Post today, with the outdated foods that were found in the Massachusetts warehouses that had not only been an isolated problem for Boston, but is an entire statewide problem. And I actually do question whether or not it's a national problem, but has just not come out, and I'm sure it is a national problem. But I hope, the new USDA reauthorization, which addresses in a more detailed, historically detailed than had been in the past, the nutrient density through requiring different colors of vegetables on the school feeding program weekly, the variety, and it does attempt to address some of the reformulation of some of the menu components, although it does contradict the theory that if you do use whole foods, you don't need to reformulate any of the menu components. I think a lot of the school meal programs in the different other towns and communities have taken the de-skilling in the processed to the point of meeting the fruit and vegetable requirements with processed foods, where you don't really have to. So, that was a very interesting perspective and puts it well into words as how this problem has evolved from the 80s. Because I personally started running these programs before the 80s, so I was trained more under the traditional model and then have worked through this whole evolution. And fortunately, it was stopped with me when I came to Worcester 10 years ago, and so we're trying to go back to the more traditional manner. And the original inception of the school feeding program is really what Jan has been referring to as the ideal kitchen. Originally, it was the ideal kitchen. And recently, American Dietetic Association had their conference in Boston, and they gave Josephine Martin an award, and they showed historically up on the stage. And she was one of the original persons who had authored some of the legislation and worked on it in the original inception, and showed historically what the program was all about. And it is consistent with what Jan had mentioned. So hopefully, again, the new reauthorization will bring these programs back to the ideal or the ultimate lunch room and what Jan is referring to. And it's just gonna be a work in action.